Arts and Sciences. I've been at Drexel for 27 years, and I have taught a whole range of courses in the social sciences and the humanities. Those are really my areas. The kinds of courses I teach are, for some of you, the kinds who are in areas like communication or psychology or business, where you may have your own classes, and we're going to ask you a question about that in a moment, where you're the sole person in charge of the class. In contrast, my colleague Dr. Anandan.
I am an associate professor in biology, so I teach mainly biology majors. Some of my courses actually also teach non-majors, so humanities students, students in engineering, etc., so different kinds of teaching. I haven't been here as long as Dr. Friedlander, but I've been here a long time. So I've seen a great diversity of students come by, and we've had to have different teaching styles to accommodate them. What we're going to try and do today is to try and set you up for your first time teaching at this campus. I'm assuming none of you has been teaching at Drexel before this, right? Right. So we're going to give you some tips from both sides of the house, and we're going to give you some tips that we think are very effective from meeting your class to maintaining their attention and how to deal with a few problems.
So I want to ask one question first, just to get a sense of who you might be. So in general, we represent two primary strands of teaching. So in terms of what you know, what you think you might be doing as a TA, how many of you think you're going to be in situations where you will be a TA doing recitations and labs under a professor in a large lecture? You just put up your hands and you get a sense of that. Thank you. And how many of you think you're going to be in a situation where you're likely to have your own class and be in control of that class? Okay. All right. Very good. So we see a not unexpected imbalance in that respect, because a lot of you, particularly if you're in the sciences and engineering, are going to be working with that.
To make sure, though, that we train you all in how to run your own class, we're going to tell you about, if you're the only quote-unquote instructor, how you can also deal with certain things. Because those of you who are working with a professor in this university will one day, hopefully sometime, want to transition into being an independent instructor. So it's nice for you to have that information right now, rather than to wait to find that information when you make that transition.
One other thing before we get started. The setup is a little awkward. Those of you who are sitting at awkward angles should feel free to turn your chair so you're facing us, so you don't get a prick in the neck or something like that.
3 hours, remember.
Yeah. Well, we won't have you sitting the whole time.
Yes.
And the other thing is, this is kind of small. So those of you who are kind of at the farther reaches of the room, you want to move closer, by all means, feel free to do so. There are chairs around here. We can pull up other chairs. So decide how you feel about this. So for those of you who were in the room when we arrived, okay, I want to ask, test your powers of observation. What did you notice about what Dr. Anandan and I were doing before this all started?
What did we not do? One of those two.
We sat down.
No, not sit.
Actually, I did sit down. I was sitting at this computer. That's all right. And I've also been standing a lot. Okay. No right and wrong answers here. Well, that was semi.
Yes.
No negative grades coming
Yes.
from this.
No grades whatsoever,
Yeah.
actually.
Okay.
Yes.
Do I hear you start setting up your computer?
Okay. He said we stop. So one of the other things is to speak up, because there's a vent blowing out so that we can't hear very much. And if you can't hear us, you need to just tell us and we'll pitch a little bit better. So that young gentleman said that we started setting up.
Okay.
Anything else that we did or we didn't do?
Anything else you noticed? Yep.
You
Yes.
did not use your first names.
Yes, we did not use our first names, okay? Anything else?
Yep.
Before you started speaking, you were observant. I saw both of you kind of scan the room to see.
Okay.
To see it.
Yep. Scanning it. For those of you further away, I'll repeat these things. So we were scanning the room. Yep. Even before that, when you're all busy enjoying your breakfast, coffees or whatever, juices.
You might have noticed
So you said I was sitting down at the computer. Did everything go well when I was sitting down at the computer?
How long was Dr. Friedlander sitting at the computer? And did he look happy? Put it that way.
Then you notice what time I came in here? And Dr. Anandan was just behind me. Sorry?
Did he look like he was having an easy time?
I guess no.
Okay.
Good. That was a leading question. Yeah. So.
Did you notice what might have been happening up here?
Are you having issues setting up your PowerPoint?
There was an issue setting up the PowerPoint. Okay. All right. Anybody know what time I arrived? I was about 10, 12 minutes before the start of the hour. Okay. Now, admittedly, in normal classroom situations, you know how much time there is between classes here at Drexel? 10 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes between classes here at Drexel.
Technically 10 minutes.
Technically 10 minutes.
In
yes.
reality, more like.
There got people, the previous professors likely to go over. You might be running late from another class, whatever. But the point we're leading up to is, I came in here early because I knew I had a setup. And the old sort of cliche, if anything can go wrong, it will. So immediately I couldn't log in. Okay, not my computer, it's the one set in here. As you will discover, if you haven't already, if you want to access the network, you have to log into Drexel's network first before you can access any programs. I tried to log into the network and it rejected me. And I tried going in as another user, rejected me. Okay, so I was here early enough that I could see if there was a way to get over that problem. Unfortunately, we had somebody from graduate studies here who was able to say, aha, the problem is I'm the only one who can log into this computer. Preparation. One of the things we're going to talk about is preparation. And particularly if you're coming into a space that is new to you, a situation is new to you, taking the time to understand what's likely to happen and what kinds of situations you need to be ready to overcome is critical. Because the worst thing that can happen to you is to be standing here at 5 minutes, 10 minutes after the hour, when you have only 15 minutes with your students and you're still struggling over the technology.
So what does that do? Okay. Think about it. So if we weren't able to do this, if we were still struggling with the computer and we were getting more and more frustrated, one, it would have shown on our faces, and two, most certainly, it would show on how we interact with you. If part of it would be still thinking, darn it, it should have worked. Right? So this is what happens if it doesn't go well. So how can you prevent this? Figure out which room you're going to be teaching in. I visit the room that I teach in the week before this week. Classes start. I like to look at the layout. I like to look at what's available to me. I like to look at the computer setup, because I use PowerPoints for most of my lectures and even a little bit in the labs. So I look at the computer setups, figure out whether I need passcodes, and in general that will be a yes. Who has the passcode so that you can log in and look as though you're in control? Right? The other thing is the room. How long will it take you to get to the room from wherever you're coming from? Your lab, your office, home, the train, whatever it is. How long is it going to take you? Because put yourself in your student's place. If you rush in 5 minutes late, and you're all sort of discombobulated and you're not in control of yourself and your mind is not on what you're teaching, what do you think their first impression or second impression or third impression of you would be? Any guesses?
Poor. It would be a poor.
It will be a poor impression, yes? You're trying to be the lead here in the classroom, in the lab, wherever it is, in the design studio, wherever else you're going to be leading these discussions and curricular events. So if their impression of you is poor, trust me, you can't retrieve it. That impression is made like this, and they don't forgive you. Truth to tell, they don't forgive you.
Sorry, this made me think of this. One other bit of housekeeping, there is a sign-in sheet going around.
Yes.
So please make sure that you do sign in. Is everybody signed in?
Okay, it's a yellow notepad where it's
So you can send it off that away, thank you. All right, so I was about to say let's start, although we already started, but let me give you an overview of what we're trying to do, or what we're going to do today over the next few hours. we want to kind of give you a sense of the whole structure of getting ready for class and then delivering a class. No matter what kind of class it is, as we said earlier, some of you are going to be doing labs, some of you are going to be doing recitations, some of you are going to have your own standalone classes. And so there are already 5 phases, shall we say, that we have listed up here. Planning your content, arranging your material, creating effective style, preparing your delivery, and then presenting the material. And one of the things that we urge you to think about is that you need to allow enough time to get through all of these phases as you prepare for each class. Certainly, the less familiar you are, in other words, the newer you are to teaching, the more time you're going to take with this at the beginning. But as you get more comfortable with the class, as you get more comfortable with the kinds of interactions that you have with the students, as you get more comfortable with the kinds of work you need to do to prepare for each class and to reflect after each class, this becomes a lot easier. But one of the things we're going to say a few times is we really urge you to take the time every time you're getting ready to teach a class. Okay? One of the things that I guarantee you neither of us do is sit down 10 minutes before class and say, okay, what am I doing today again? Right? We've spent some time between the last class and this class thinking about what we have to accomplish, how it relates to the earlier classes, how it relates to the future classes, and what it is we want to try and accomplish in the next 15 minutes, the next 80 minutes, the next whatever time frame it is.
So why would you want to be the best TA that you can be? Let me give you some very pragmatic reasons. One, by having a teaching assistantship, and teaching assistantships on any campus are extremely competitive. By being fortunate enough to have a teaching assistantship, you have a stipend. Granted, it's not luxurious, but no graduate student really gets luxurious stipends. And the second one, which I think is actually equally or even more important, your tuition is paid for you. You get tuition remission. Okay? So it allows you to do your research as a graduate student, to get your advanced degree without actually having to use much, if any, of your own money.
At least for tuition.
At least for tuition, right. Right. Cost of living depends on your living style. The bigger point that maybe you're not seeing quite as brilliantly quite yet is that this is giving you experience. That once you graduate with your degree, you can parlay out there to get yourself a job. It doesn't mean that you have to teach forever. Dr. Friedlander and I actually love doing this, so we've been here doing this plus our research for a very long time. But it gives you a very marketable skill. And the better you are at that skill, the more marketable you become. Okay? So just 2 reasons as to why some of what we are talking about today will be important for you as a TA, and why the TA experience is actually in the long term a very positive one for you. You won't learn these skills otherwise. So, let's talk about planning your content. What Dr. Friedlander and I have actually been hitting quite a bit is this part here. This part here. Prepare ahead of time. If in general you are not the kind of person who likes to plan a lot, you're going to want to take a good look at planning for the purposes of being a TA. Let me just tell you that spontaneity, while it is very lovely, while you're doing an activity with your students, for 10 weeks of being a TA, you're going to want to plan. Okay? You can't just get up in the morning and say, I'm going to do this today. Because for the most part, and this is why we asked you, most of you are working with an instructor in a particular curriculum. And the instructor will probably tell you some of the things they want done. For those of you who are fortunate enough to be teaching your own classes, you could do the, what am I going to teach today? But remember again what we said to you. So there isn't any planning done. If you don't have your head in the game and you don't really know what you're going to do when you walk into that classroom, students are going to smell it like this.
All right, think about it. You're going to one of your graduate seminars. What are you doing before that class? What are you doing before that class? Preparing by, what kinds of preparation might you do? You could be reviewing notes.
Reading the text.
Reading the text.
Right?
Or whatever text you have.
or papers.
Going over examples of what you do.
Great. Thinking of examples to use, yes. So you're reading, you're writing notes while you're reading, or after you read it, you're going further, you're using those notes to generate some examples that you could use in class. Anything else? Yes? Ah, yes. We will come to that. Good. Try to anticipate some questions. Yeah. I mean, there are some obvious ones perhaps that you can see that the students might ask you. Great. Anticipate some questions. Anything else? Remember, what's your time frame here? How long do you think you're going to be in front of a particular section or a particular class? Do you know? 50 minutes. So 50 minutes if it's a discussion section on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Right?
Yeah.
What about Tuesday and Thursday?
20 minutes.
A little over an hour, hour 20. Right? So the time blocks are longer on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then if you're in a lab section, like in biology, if you're a TA teaching a lab section, how long do you expect one section to last?
2 hours.
2 hours, yes.
And in some areas like chemistry, you can have labs that are even longer than that.
Yeah.
So,
Those labs go very long.
So the kind of preparation you do for a graduate seminar can be no different from the kind of preparation you need to do to prepare to teach a class, be in front of a group of students, be ready to help.
One of the positive about your TA is actually related to what we just talked about with the graduate seminar. You'll find that because you have to face this group of undergraduates and sort of get the material to them, sometimes against their will, you're going to become an extremely good communicator. You're going to figure out what works for an audience of undergraduates. Trust me, it'll work for an audience of your peers or even your faculty. Just up the nerd bit a little bit. But your communication style will start to develop it. Your preparation style will be developed. And by the time you finish that first quarter of TA-ship, your communication styles in oral communication in a forum like this would be really spot on. So this is the other thing that teaching gives you. And I think that young lady over there talked about anticipating questions. That's a really great skill if you're giving your own research presentation to a group of faculty.
So we've got a whole lot of bullets here, which you really alluded to directly and indirectly, is all the kinds of things that you want to be doing as you're thinking about what content you have to try and get through in that next class that you're preparing. Okay? Certainly in the third bullet, which really relates to those of you who are going to be working with a professor, you've got to make sure that you understand what happened in the lecture on Monday morning, so in your recitation on Tuesday or your lab on Thursday, you're ready to make those connections with the students. Because you're going to understand that, but the students aren't necessarily going to do that. That's part of your job, is to help them with that. Okay? But you have to remember what happened, because if you don't recognize the key points that the professor gave during the lecture, then you run into difficulties. The students invariably are going to have questions.
So this is where your instructor, the professor that you work with, can actually help. When I was teaching freshmen and I had up to 12 TAs, we'd have weekly TA meetings. We would have a meeting this week for all the TAs to let them know my expectations of them. If your professor hasn't done that, it might be a good idea to ask, what are their expectations of you? Because miscommunication is bad. You know, they expect something, you don't know what they expect, that's not a great place to be, but you could ask. The second thing is, and we'll get to this, is the syllabus. That's one of your friends, right? The third thing is, I take notes on everything. Just because, I'm not sure I can hold it in my head all the time, your life is going to be extremely busy. You have your own research and your own classes, and then you're going to teach these classes. Then you hopefully have a little bit of a social life. So it's going to be very busy, a lot busier than I think you anticipated. Write things down. Even if it's your own little code or your own little words or something, write things down, because then you have a reference point that you can look at and come back and elaborate on when you're trying to do this. The students will come to you first because you're the least threatening person. The professor is the most threatening person. So they'd rather ask you first. So if you don't know what went on in lecture, you know, there goes your credibility again. You want to make sure that you know what your role is, both from the eyes of the instructor and the eyes of the professor. You're that connection between the two sides.
And then the final point, by the way, these are pointers in all these slides are guidelines. Okay, they're not exhaustive. There are other things that you can be doing to help, in this case, plan. But the other thing, and that is the last bullet point, and that's a really critical one, that's getting to know your students, getting to understand them, getting to think about how they're likely to act and react. Okay? And there are a number of different ways in which we might approach that. There's something called diversity of learners. In other words, that people learn in different ways, that people approach the way they assimilate material, learn material in ways that are different. And there are things called ways of learning that have to do with whether some people may be seen as more auditory or more visual, or other methods like that, as ways in which they can go about assimilating material that's important.
So not everybody learns the same way, right? Do you know how you learn best? You probably have figured it out, right? How many of you like pictures? The primary way for you to learn is to look at figures, charts, pictures. How many of you? Okay, so you're very visual. How many of you like reading it instead of the pictures? Pictures being not that great, but reading it. Okay, so you like the text. And how many of you need to hear it? So every one of us, I think, has a primary way we learn and then a couple of secondary ones. I'm very visual. I like pictures. Not so much text, but pictures. And if I can freeze it in my mind that way, I learn very well. And the second for me is auditory. I've had students whose main way of learning is auditory, right? And so what do you think you could do to help somebody who's an auditory learner? Those of you who just identified yourself will probably know this really well. How do auditory learners learn best? How can you help them do this? The advantage of being a visual learner, remember, is that the textbook and the slides that you upload into BB Learn can always be accessed, yes? But for an auditory learner, it's a little harder, so yes?
Maybe you can say what the actual text says and then say it a different way, like maybe just say it
to yourself?
Well, no, to the student.
Yep, you could, right?
As far as helping them with on their own, you can tell them to use YouTube videos and things that will speak to them in their own time.
Right. So we live in the age of technology. That's a great idea. YouTube videos are great. You could point that out. You have another point?
You could do, like, you could have a recording, like, just that you should probably do recordings and then upload them.
Yep. They could record your lectures. Yes.
I have them repeat whatever you tell them, and they ask the same, they say themselves.
Yep, you can repeat it. I frequently tell my students not to worry about feeling foolish, to repeat it to themselves as they're learning in their dorms or wherever they are, because they're hearing it. Right? And recording is an easy one. I just make the provision that this is not going to be put as a YouTube video. This is not going anywhere but for their private use. Then they can do it. Because you really don't want all of this somewhere else.
Okay, so you don't want to hear us talk for 3 hours, and we don't want to talk for 3 hours. So we're going to try and break things up along the way and have you do some activities. So what we want you to do now is to get into groups. You can be pretty much where you're sitting, 3, 4, 5 of you. And what we want you to do as a group is to discuss ways in which, first of all, how you think that you should, the ways in which you think you need to get to know your students, and then ways in which you think you need to approach explanation, answering questions, etc., based on the different kinds of students you're likely to have in your class. Okay? So along the lines of these few ideas that have just come through right now, what are ways in which you want to get to know your students and ways in which you can get to know students that will help them and help you help them? So we'll take a few minutes now to get into small groups, and as a group discuss this question.
And you can make your group as small or all combine 2 tables, or this is not a, this is not a test.
I've literally drawn a chalk filled eraser as somebody before, like a
too. I was looking at that. And then like on the last time I go, then walk in there and be like, hey guys,
It's really cute.
Interrupt me with one question to getting this like repeat and like have it interactive. There's one I think there's actually like I've been holding on all this major information.
Yeah, I usually say
I'm just trying to like how many creative pictures, animation, in the first year. I mean, actually, I was the organization that helps women who want to move from their career path to technology. So it's just skills of how you can build a website or job fairs. So I'm doing that and so I went to Drexel. So I'm for undergrad. So the whole I know all the classes I'm teaching and the faculty. There's actually Catholic classes. Yeah, so and I'm like, one of them who taught me for the same class. He's teaching another section.
Also, you can look up your majors on the Drexel boards, I guess.
Not learned Drexel one actually. They had class list and it tells you your year, which is really good because then you know their serious level. And also tells you like their major and their minor. So a lot of them are like somebody that has been inspired by entertainment and then we have like 2 film kids as well. So we also really there's no one else doing that. Like we're automatically like well done. To discuss how you would approach your class and how you would figure out or ask the types of learners. Would you like to report out to us what you talked about? So a couple of things about why we're trying to do a few interactive exercises with you. You're building a cohort, so at your tables you've got people that you're using as aids to help you do this exercise. So if you want to get each other's contact information, this is a nice way of
knowing graduate students across Drexel that are in your first year cohort. And the second thing is you probably have ideas of your own, but it's really lovely to get ideas from other people, because then your pool of how to do's gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Shamelessly use them. Okay, anybody like to share with us? Volunteer. I don't like to point and say you start off, so volunteers. Yes?
As far as getting to know the students, one thing that we pointed out was on the first day, introduce yourself and let them know who you are, where you're from, and one thing you like about yourself one thing about yourself that's random, has nothing to do with science or whatever you're teaching, and then let all of them do the same thing, because it's kind of like doing an icebreaker without actually making them do an icebreaker. So now everybody's talking, everybody's kind of getting to know each one another. So now they know you're more personable. And then as far as helping them learn, one thing we said was influencing them to work with one another, and somebody also said, switching partners every now and then, not necessarily sticking with the same person, because a lot of times the questions that they have and they'll bring to us, maybe somebody else in the class knows. And when you're studying with someone, you see where they're at, and if they're ahead of you, you know what work you need to do, and vice versa. So
great. Great. Peer learning is a really strong way of learning. We all know that, right? We'd rather lose face in front of our peers rather than the faculty or the TAs. So if you could encourage that, that's a really nice positive. Thank you. Yes.
So we talked about a few different things, one of which is like how I usually used to begin lunch undergrad, which is pretty much just ask, like on the first day, ask students, what do you want to get out of this class? Like exactly, do you want to do problem solving? Do you want to maybe clear some things up that you missed in lecture? What exactly do you want? Do you want me just to stay at the board? Do you want to work groups? Like what do you want? That's usually a good way to kind of like get a feel for the class. And then you mentioned what we did yesterday, which was the lady suggested that we kind of do like a pretest, like a non-graded pretest to kind of gauge what people's mathematical abilities are, or like where they are in the courses.
Yeah, that will freak them out. Right? That will freak them out no end, because graded or not graded, that's their first test, and oh my God, right? But you can use that to inform you, and you can then, what I would do is do a very dramatic gesture at the end of the class and just go, no, this is not graded, this was just to make them feel good, that remember that they're a little fragile sometimes. All of us are fragile sometimes.
Yeah, but I don't bother to I don't rip those up. Because I teach writing related classes, so I need to know where my students are in terms of their writing abilities. So I'll often give them an in-class writing in the first week of the term. I don't tear them up. I need the time to read them. I can't look at them there and then in class. I want to get a sense of where their abilities are and what kinds of issues. It's not punitive. I mean, I tell them it doesn't count. There's no grades associated with it, but it helps me understand what some of the issues are I may need to focus on during the course of the term.
So I'm teaching this lab very much just a lab course. It's a research type lab course. So the students get to experiment, design their own experiments to get this one outcome. And they have a quiz, the first recitation. It's on the syllabus. Why do you think I'm doing this? I mean, most of them are going to go, oh my God. But it's meant to, that's part of it. Because it's depending on their designing the experiments, they need to read the manual. My job is not to tell them, unlike another lab course, it's not to tell them how to do it, it's to tell them to think about their design. And there's no way that they're going to do this if they don't know the background knowledge. So this is to say, you're going to have to keep up with that. Even if I give you 5 questions or 10 questions and you get, 5 out of 10, how do you feel about that? This can only get better kind of thing. Sometimes not the best way of dealing with it, but it's a way of just shaking them up and saying, in 10 weeks, there's no free weeks. So this is the other thing. We are a 10-week, fall is 11-week quarter. It goes fast for both us and for the students. This is why the planning tends to help. Right. Knowing what's coming tends to help. But for the students, you might have to be the one who yanks a little bit at that chain or reminds them, we're here now. Your midterm's going to be in 2 weeks. Because they're not the first week is like, oh, we're here and life is good and oh my God, and how are you and how was your summer? Right?
So what are some other ideas for getting to know your students and getting to know what kinds of learners they are and helping them in that respect? Yes.
The easiest would obviously be to spend a day just, or not maybe a full day, but discussing different methods and then asking. Like, maybe the con is going to use some time. The other also has its pros and cons. We really liked it, was the other one was try to design a couple problems, 3 or 4 problems or questions that you tell them to solve a certain way. Like, if you want to solve this problem, where I'm going to use these blocks, these models, and have them go to what they feel most comfortable with. That obviously has a cost being extremely instructor intensive.
That's a really
creative way.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
We thought it was a great idea.
Very creative.
A lot of work for the person.
Excellent.
You can have them hand in a piece of paper with teaching styles they find helpful or teaching styles they don't find helpful, and give them a few options so they're not just trying to guess.
Okay, so a version that I've used with my freshmen for that one is to hand out index cards. And by the way, anything you buy for the class, you're not responsible to pay for. You can ask the office if they will supply it for you. So I usually, when I was using the freshman class, I would hand out these blank index cards. The first time around, I would say, your name, something interesting about you, something you like doing, blah, blah, blah. And then I would take them and keep them with me. And then I would also hand out a second set of blank index cards. And that was for if they wanted to ask me questions, but they didn't want to ask questions face-to-face in class. They could just ask the question, no name, drop it, on the podium or the table near me, and I'd take them and I'd come back the next day and say, so we have a couple of questions, let's talk about this. Right? So there's no loss of face, there's no, oh my God, she's so, that's just, and I said, anything goes kind of thing. So sometimes anonymity is a good thing, even with you guys, that they bond to is a good thing. Okay, another table, another group. Don't feel shy. Again, you're not graded on this, there's no right or wrong answers, there are ideas, and sharing the ideas helps everybody have this, suite of things that you can pull from later on. How about you guys? You were having a good discussion, I saw, so.
I'm doing mostly recitations, so I expect I'll just be doing a lot of problem solving up on the board. However, like I pointed out, it's kind of hard to get students to come up to the board, so you're thinking just have them arrange arrange them into groups and have them work out amongst themselves, because generally it's a little bit easier to talk to your peers about the troubles that you're having. It might be easier to talk to a TA than a professor, but certainly it's easier to talk to a student than a TA. So,
right.
Just kind of get a bit of a hive mind mentality going, get flux of ideas back and forth, get them to kind of help each other out in areas of the week.
Yep. I think that's a really nice way of approaching it. It also starts to spread the word on collaboration rather than me and me and me. And they get the idea then that they can actually ask for help. Or, I think for all of us who have made it through or to a college education, it's hard to say, I need help. The biggest problem that you might face in your students is that they find it difficult to ask for help. And thankfully, we can't read each other's minds. And so this is a good way of seeing if you can make safe environments for them. And if you mix the groups in, then, switch them out a little bit, that makes it even safer. Okay, we have a lot of groups, but we're going to, so hold those thoughts.
Well, we haven't quite reached the end of that, because there's something else that Drexel provides for you.
Yes.
A little practical. I'll get this going again. Okay, so turns out, once we can get this clear enough, in Drexel 1, if you are teaching a class in Drexel 1, there is something right down here called Photo Class List. And if I select it, I can then get this. Okay, that's the class I'm teaching this fall, starting next Wednesday. I can get a list of, get the photos. Where are these taken from, by the way? They're taken from the your IDs. So, sometimes they look like mug shots, But
Sometimes it's very glamorous.
yeah, really. So all of the classes that you yourselves are taking, your professors have access to this as well. They can get that. But I use this, okay? I print this out, and it immediately gives me a sense of, you know, who the students are. They're usually recognizable. They aren't always recognizable, but usually recognizable.
Not at exam time.
And you know, these photos, many of them were taken back in July when they were here for orientation, so who knows what changes they've made to hairstyle and other things since then. But the point is, you've got this photo class list, so you can print that out, and at least that gives you something to use in class. And when I do the introductions on day one, I use that list. Okay, I sort of make notes alongside it, and sometimes they're personal. In other words, I might note that somebody, you know, the hairstyle is completely different, and they've now got something radically different, and so I'll make a note about that, so at least for myself I know. But this is really valuable.
One of the things the students do like is when you know their names, and particularly if you recognize them outside of class and just say hello, then you don't even have to use their names. They like that recognition because it's sort of like they belong somewhere, rather than being floating around in this university not belonging to people. So I use that class list to get to know my students. And if you're in a small section, it's no big deal to get to know 20 to 25 faces. When I have a full class, when I used to teach 100 some, it took a little bit more work, but you could then correlate your photo class list with people putting their hands up, and so try and imprint those things on their mind. Think about how you would like to be treated as a student in a class. Would you like to be treated as an anonymous person all the time? Or would you like it at least if there was a little recognition from your instructor that you belong to that class? So it helps again to build that cohorting and the identity with you as their TA.
All right. So, part one, planning your content. Next part is arranging your material. And what we mean by arranging your material is essentially deciding how you are going to structure your class. Okay? You've got the 50 minutes, you've got the 80 minutes, you've got whatever the time frame is. Okay? And there are a number of different ways in which one can go about doing it. The most obvious, which is something we've already alluded to and we're going to return to again and again, is this kind of preview. Okay? Right from the beginning. Tell them what you're going to say. I always try to start off my class by saying, all right, in class today, here is what we're going to try to accomplish. And I give them a list of key points. So they have a sense as to what it is we're going to do. Remember, if you have, there's a textbook, and there's a lot of stuff that's covered in every chapter of that textbook. There's no way you can go through everything. You've got some pointers to understand what you might need to go through, so that if the professor highlighted certain things in the lecture and you know that you need to highlight those in your recitation in some way, then that gives you some direction. But it's really critical to start off that class by saying, here's what we want to accomplish today.
And then you accomplish it. And then you do your exercises, you do your problem solving, you do your discussion or breakout or whatever it is for the bulk of that time, right? So what you're doing then for the bulk of the time should relate back to what you told them you wanted to accomplish. That's that really important to correlate that. You can't say today we're going to discuss Mendelian genetics, so I'm sorry, I'm a biologist, and go off and talk about you know, the social injustices of the world. Nah, not a good fit.
Plus, if you're doing a good job of preparing for your class, you've created your own notes. So you know, here are the following 5 points I want to accomplish in this class. Not only are you telling them at the start, this is what we're going to accomplish, but because you planned, you got them sitting on a piece of paper in front of you, and therefore you know for yourself exactly what it is you want to accomplish, so you can allow enough time to do it. There's nothing worse than going to class saying, okay, today we're going to go through chapter 3, but you kind of forget about what the key points were you wanted to make, because you didn't write some notes ahead of time.
So Dr. Friedlander and I like paper. For you guys and for your students, I think, you know, what I try to do these days is try to have an outline going of the key points I want to make on my computer, so that it's easy then to add and subtract. move things around. And so then you can do that, and you can bring your computer with you, we'll get to that in a moment, or you can print it out, and if you decide when the discussion is ongoing in your class, you're going to switch the order of a couple of things, you can do that. But this is again what we were talking about in terms of planning. Again, spontaneity is wonderful in real life, it's really great, but for when you're teaching, planning goes a long way to helping solve problems before they occur. So you want to think about it. The other thing is, this is again, for those of you who are working with an instructor, this is where maybe if you do the weekly meetings, or if you want to set up this question and answer with the instructor, you can ask the instructor, what particularly do you want me to focus on? This is a very large chapter, this is a large section, what particular points do you want me to hit? Because then you're really nicely in sync with your instructor, and the message is getting to your students not once but twice. If you're led to decide that, then I would suggest that you